Good afternoon. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen, and I'm the Director of Communications here at PFLAG National, coming to you from lovely Burbank, California. So glad to have you with us. As usual, we will be taking your comments and questions, so be sure to chime in the comments, whether you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll get to them a little later in the broadcast. Right now, it is my pleasure, as always, to bring you my colleague and partner in crime, Jean Marie Navetta, the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. Hello,
Thank
Jean Marie.
Hey, Liz. Hello from Palm Springs, California, where we're all working from home. Thank you, Liz. And welcome, everybody, to Something to Talk About. I'm really excited to be back with you again. We've been doing this for about a month, if you can believe it. It started as let's try this, and here we are a month later. So last week, if you were able to join us, we were talking about banned books and the American Library Association's list of most frequently protested or banned books in American libraries for 2019. And we had a fantastic conversation. However, we were supposed to have a special guest with us, and due to technical problems at the very last minute, she was not able to make it. So this week, we are going to do something a little different, which is a one-on-one conversation with the author, Lesley Ann Neumann. She is pretty impressive, and I guarantee if you don't know her name right now, you know some of the stuff that she's done. So Lesley is the author of over 70 books, including A Letter to Harvey Milk, A Song for Matthew Shepard, The Boy Who Cried Fabulous, and the most famous one for many of us, Heather Has Two Mommies, as I like to call it, the original banned book we talk about. She has won dozens of awards. She has been invited to multiple colleges and universities to speak and teach. She is faculty at the Spalding University School of Creative and Professional Writing. She is also personally one of my literary idols who, in her earlier writing, and I have my copy of her reader right here, completely transformed my life. So I'd like to bring in Lesley Ann Neumann right now to start our conversation.
Hi, Jean.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Nice to see you.
It is always good to see you. And I'm so sorry about the challenges we had last week, but I am thrilled that you are here with us today because this was such a perfect conversation for you.
Well, I'm eager to talk about it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, for those of you who are following along online, we are basing today's conversation off the article that we talked about last week, which the title of it was 8 of last year's 10 most challenged books had one thing in common: LGBTQ content, and that appeared on CNN.com. And the article went on to list out all different kinds of books that were getting banned. One of the ones from this year was A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo. It referenced other books like I Am Jazz and This Day in June. So it went through a lot of the bans that have been going on, and it noted some interesting new trends. So Lesléa, let's talk a little bit about what those trends look like. So one of the interesting things to all of us, although we had mixed reactions on if we were surprised or not, was the fact that 8 of the 10 books this year on the most requested to be banned book list had to do with LGBTQ characters or LGBTQ content. In 2020, does that surprise you? I mean, you're a writer seeing this in a different way than we are. So what do you think?
So this does not surprise me at all, because the other thing that they have in common is that they're books for kids, right? So, many adults feel like they can control the lives of kids, their kids and other people's kids and teens. And, sometimes I like to say, well, I can give them the benefit of the doubt. They only want the best for their kids. But to them, the best is that they want their kids' lives maybe to turn out like their lives. And that's not necessarily in the best interest of the child, right? I always tell people, I was an avid reader as a kid. I read thousands of books, each one about a heterosexual person, right? And not one of those changed my sexuality. Your child is your child. You want your child to be gay or straight or bi or trans or happy. That is the key.
Yeah.
So this didn't surprise me at all. In fact, many people sent me the article and said, gee, how come you're not on that? And many of my friends are on that list. Alex Gino is a friend of mine. He wrote George, they wrote George. Susan Kuklin is the interviewer and photographer for Beyond Magenta. I know Jessica Hertel very well. So, we have this little club going on.
So I guess that, unfortunately in 2020, the story is that no one's really surprised by this, and that there's enough people to kind of identify as part of the club who have been pushed to be banned now, it seems so counterintuitive to where we are in many respects.
Well, and banned is a funny word. I mean, they call it the,
Mhm.
most banned, but really the books are challenged.
Yes.
And very few of them actually get banned. So they get challenged. Somebody comes to the library, they get unhappy, they see a book, they fill out a form. And most of the time, the librarians choose to keep the book in the library because it's a public library, which means
Right.
it serves the public. A lot of people say, I don't want my tax dollars going for this kind of literature. And I'm like, hi, I pay taxes, right? you know and in school libraries, people, I feel like, are even more, I'll use the word, protective of their children, and they feel like they should be able to dictate what the curriculum is. But I always say, you come into a classroom, you don't know where's the child that's going to grow up to be LGBTQ, where's the child that has an LGBTQ person in their family. So your job is to serve everybody.
Yeah. And that's such an interesting point, because I think that often people's immediate reaction is, oh, it's about the child being LGBTQ identified, when in fact we are looking at families all over schools that look different than many of the families that we grew up with, where there are two mommies and two daddies, or different sort of permutations of what family looks like. So this is so much of a bigger conversation than just books about LGBTQ people. What I'm kind of interested in, because you actually brought up an interesting part of this discussion, which is about 31% of the challenges that happened last year actually happened in school libraries, not necessarily more general public libraries. Part of our conversation last week went to sort of what this comes down to gatekeeping. Who is gatekeeping in school libraries? Who is gatekeeping in public libraries, and where are they coming from? So could you talk a little bit about what that gatekeeping has looked like for you? I know that we talked about a story of something that recently happened to you, about an invitation that you had, but sort of what is the experience of being on the other side of this gatekeeping as an author? What does it feel like? Because it's something we don't often think about, because we're always thinking about ourselves as the reader.
Well, every librarian makes choices, right? A librarian can't order every single book that's been published. So, sometimes, let's say I go to a school and the library, they don't have my books. It's not necessarily banning or censorship. It could be budget issues, but
Mhm.
I would hope that there are books in all school libraries that have broad representation across gender lines and race and class and religion. So, it's so empowering for a kid to see a book and can say, I'm like that character. That's like my family. It's so validating. And I know that from Heather Has Two Mommies, because back then, when it first was published in 1989, I got so many letters from kids saying, thank you for writing Heather Has Two Mommies. I know that you wrote it just for me. And stories from lesbian moms who said that, that their kid took the book to bed under their pillow every night and just like physically didn't want to be separated from it. That's how important it is. So, I think that librarians have a huge responsibility to the kids. I know they get a lot of pressure from parents and community, but really, most librarians are thinking about the kids, as it should be.
Yeah, and I think that often they are. As I have a lot of friends who are librarians, and it always seems that they are on the search for sort of what the next thing is, that'll represent the people who are walking up to the desk to take out books from them. And it seems that a lot of these pressures are often externally focused, that it actually is not at all about the librarians. So now, could you talk a little bit about what navigating some of these restrictions and limitations looks like for you? I know that you had said, we had been talking a little bit earlier, and you had mentioned that you had been invited and then not invited to a couple of things based on your background. And that, again, gets to this conversation of gatekeeping literature. Who gets access to it, and how will they get it? Will we make it easy for people or not? Could you tell a little bit about what that's looking like and what that feels like, and any sort of stories you can tell us there?
So, my job, my self-imposed job, is to create literature that is inclusive and really that makes kids feel good about themselves and their place in the world. So, you know, I I sometimes or often try to stay out of it because it's so upsetting, but very often I'm drawn into things. So the story that you're alluding to is that this past, what month are we in? I don't even know, but within the last 6 months, I was invited to 3 Jewish day schools to talk about my book, Gittle's Journey and Ellis Island Story, which is a story of immigration, which is very topical, right? Though this story takes place in the early 1900s and is based on my own family history. And so 2 days before my visit, one school canceled. They said they had a field trip that day. Now, come on. I know you can't get a field trip together that quickly, right? What are the other ones? The other school said the building was dangerous, so they didn't want me coming. And I'm like, really? The building is dangerous? Well, are the kids there? So anyway, the third school that I did go to, that librarian said, of course, the real reason is, they don't want a lesbian coming into their school. And I'm like, I even, and I'm not closeted by any means, but I even had said, because first they said, are you only talking about Gittle's journey? And I was like, I knew where this was going, but I agreed to that because I really wanted to talk to the kids. So how do I respond to something like this? This was so hurtful to me because these are my people, so when you tell me to shut up, I just get louder because that's what I do. So I wrote an essay called The Uninvited about this experience and how hurtful it was. And really, the worst part of it is that the kids miss out, right? The kids missed out on a fabulous speaker, that would be me, sharing my story with them, which I think they would be very interested in. And actually, and then I published that essay on the Nerdy Book Club's website, which is a great website. But so the third group that the only school that did allow me to come, the kids were so interested and they were like, oh, you're Jewish? Because I greeted them by saying Boker Tov, which is Hebrew for good morning. And they were just astonished and we bonded immediately. And then ironically, I showed them a short film I made with the real Gittle's daughter, who's my Aunt Phyllis, who's 92. And in the film, I asked her, what is the most important thing your parents, who are both immigrants, taught you? And she said, to be accepting of everybody. And that's the message that the children of the other 2 schools didn't get to hear.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think that's your super controversial message.
Exactly.
That was what caused such controversy.
Well, the super controversial message in Heather Has Two Mommies is that the most important thing about a family is that all the people in it love each other.
Yeah.
Right. Also very controversial.
Yeah, incredibly controversial. I distinctly remember when the book came out and when the controversy started and thinking, I mean, yes, it's a different story, but story about a kid's mom's. Like, it just seems so obvious, and yet there was just absolute fury on it. We're getting comments from Christy who said it's so unfortunate that the kids do miss out. In the end, I think so many of these battles that we are having on a large adult scale, the person who ends up getting damaged actually are the kids because they don't have access to this literature. And your children's books have not exclusively had LGBTQ themes, Gittle being a perfect example of that. Right. And yet you kind of get painted with the broad Heather brush, I guess. Still.
It will be on my gravestone. Here lies Lesléa Newman, author of Heather Has Two Mommies.
I would say there are worse legacies to have than that one.
Well, that's true.
So, one of the things that we talked about last week in some length was what people should do. So you read articles like this, we get upset about articles like this, we hear stories, even sometimes from the places that we live where controversy is happening like this. I know that I have read so many stories about libraries trying to end drag queen story hours, for example, which I think has been such an incredible inclusion experience for people. So what we talked about last week was, what should you do when you find out that these things are going on, or what should you do even if this kind of stuff is upsetting you? So because you're coming from a different place than we were last week as the readers, as an author, when you hear about books being challenged or banned in certain places, what should readers be doing? And what should be readers, what should people out there be doing beyond just the reading those books? But do you have any other advice about how we can combat this level of intolerance, literary intolerance, if you will?
I think it's really important for everybody to use their voice. So you can write letters to your newspaper. You can contact the library. You can show up here in liberal Northampton, believe it or not, we had a drag queen story hour, and there were threats and all of that, which, didn't pan out, and so the library has to take this seriously and has to have a discussion. And so they decided, no, we're gonna go on with drag queen story hour, and they had over 100 families. It was one of the biggest events they ever had. So I think it's just really important to show up, use your voice, make sure that the books that you want to be in the library are there, even if you have to buy them and donate them. Libraries' budgets have been slashed, especially now. There's going to be great fallout with budgets for everybody. But if you can afford that, that's a great thing to do. But you can always write letters to local publications. And because, most of the time people who write letters are against something, right? That's what inspires people. So write a letter that says you're for something.
Yeah.
And that is just as powerful, if not more so.
I love that. I used to do advocacy work, and we used to talk about the thank and spank letters. You thank people when they do the right thing. You spank when they do the wrong thing. We always go to the bad stuff. But sometimes sending those, thank you for doing the right thing. Thank you for having that book. Thank you for doing Drag Queen Story Hour or inviting that author, are the most powerful things that we can do. So I would be remiss. Liz is actually telling me that we have some questions, so I want to switch over so we can do some of those questions. But there are two more questions that I wanted to ask you. My first one was my more topical one, which is, what are you reading now that is inspiring you? What excites you right now? And do you have any suggestions for people?
Wow, my mind always goes blank when I'm asked that question. But I just read a wonderful, wonderful poetry book called Indigo by Ellen Bass, who's one of my favorite poets. I turn to poetry a lot, in times like this. There's a new novel in verse about Kent State, which I don't know the exact name of it, unfortunately, but I just started reading that. Look, I have my bookshelf right here. I just read this book called Jack Kerouac is Dead to Me.
Great
I went
title.
to the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics, so this title really caught my eye, and it's a teen novel which has a really strong female protagonist voice. I'm trying to think of what else I've read lately. Just a lot of poetry. Poetry is what really soothes my soul during trying times such as this. Oh, I just read a book called If God Invented Baseball, which was very interesting.
That sounds like a great title too.
Yeah.
It's funny, I've been reading a lot of poetry and I haven't done it for years, and suddenly it's making the world make sense to me. I'm going to ask you the second really important question, which is, can we discuss your shoes? So for those of you who do not know the two of us, shoes are something on which we have bonded. Please.
Yes. So since I have can you see it? A sparkly gold sweater on. I'll stand up a little bit. So I have these shoes that have sparkly gold heels, chunky heels. Whoops, I can't see which way my camera is. There we go.
Oh, it's showing.
And a very pointy toe.
Thank you. And this is why you will always be my idol. And just to be clear, I'm doing also a chunky heel in your honor, but buttoned to go with my dress today. So at least we've resolved that problem.
Yes, that was very important.
It was actually probably should have been the first question. I am a terrible interviewer. Liz, I think we have some questions there. Do you want to come in and talk to us?
Yes, I am not wearing shoes. I just want to say that and get any awkwardness out of the way before I bring the questions in. I'm barefoot because I didn't realize we were going to be comparing shoes. So I will be prepared next time. We do have a bunch of questions here. So we have one here from Charity asking, as someone who's penned challenged literature yourself that's positively affected so many lives, what pieces of challenged literature positively affected your life?
Well, I was a student of Allen Ginsberg's. And so, his book Howl was challenged in the courts, and he won his censorship court case. So I think that he is very proud up there. He's in heaven, I think, of me, his student, for also having a book that was so challenged. So I would say that would be the main one, would be Howl.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question here from Jamel. Question for Lesléa. Has the tone or frequency of challenges and bans changed since the original release of Heather Has Two Mommies? Great question for you.
So, the book was reissued in 2015, was it 2019? I can't remember. I'd have to look. But there really were no challenges that I knew of back at when it was re-released. It was re-released in 2015. Wow, 5 years ago. I can't believe that. So I think, though, just in general, I feel a little bad saying this, but I feel like people are getting nastier.
Mm.
And I think that is because you can be anonymous on the internet in a different way than you used to be able to attack people. So I think it's a little scary out there. So I'm not really sure if I have much more to say than that.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think even, the subject matter is already so difficult, but at least there was some discourse required before the internet, that you were required to have the challenging conversations because you couldn't be anonymous. You were writing it in a slip of paper. You had to put your name on it. It required, PFLAG's all about having difficult conversations, and it was required. Now it's just, I don't like this book, with no, so yeah, I mean, I would imagine that.
Well, also, people don't realize that, if they put nasty reviews about a book on Goodreads or on Amazon.com, it really affects your rating, and that really can affect sales, and it can really affect an author, just personally how we feel, but also our income, and also the likelihood that another book of ours will get published. So, this, in a way, the internet is a mixed thing, so
And it's forever.
and it's forever.
And it's forever. Yeah. Yeah.
We have another question here from another author, from Elizabeth. What advice would you give a first-time LGBT Catholic author from Nebraska to prepare for the backlash they will receive if they ever publish a manuscript? It's a great question.
Wow, that is a great question. So I think it's important to have a team of allies, whether that is family members, family of origin, creative chosen family, friends, other people in the industry. It's important to get to know the people in your industry. So there's a wonderful organization, and you may or may not know about it, called SCBWI, which stands for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which you can join, and you will get support from them. Of course, there is the American Library Association. They have freedom of expression committees. You can definitely get support from them. But, you're good to think about it now, because, you probably will get some backlash. So it's important to gather as many people around you as you can that are going to support you, and never doubt that what you're doing is important. Because, as we all know, a lot of LGBTQ youth are vulnerable and feel at risk. And unfortunately, some of them don't have the strength to go on, and our suicide rate is very high. And so I always think about, I could be saving a life, and that's what keeps me going. Or I could be saving someone from getting bullying, or I could be, the thing about writing children's books is that you can change a child's life. And there's nothing more gratifying than that. And that's worth all the risk, at least to me.
We got a comment here. Toby works with the Safe Schools Coalition in Colorado, who spearheaded a campaign to encourage a district to purchase 12 LGBTQ books for the elementary schools. But unfortunately, in the more conservative schools, the books often sat on the counselors' desks and didn't reach the kids that could benefit from them. That's kind of goes back to that gatekeeping conversation you were having.
It does. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's always, one of the pieces of the conversation that came up last week in regards to this was the importance of being engaged in your school district just to start with, being involved in the school board, showing up at meetings, because your influence in other sectors is going to influence whether some of those books make it off a person's desk and onto a shelf or not. And I think that kind of speaks to, it's not just about the book, it's about this sort of this holistic approach to making sure that we're being inclusive in schools. So.
Right. I mean, what is the atmosphere in that school? It sounds to me like it's not a very welcoming atmosphere. So what can be done in that community to change that? Because there are kids in that school that are part of the LGBTQ community, whether self-identified or family members, right? And they're obviously getting a message that that's not okay.
Yeah.
Which is very harmful.
So often you just want to start yelling at people. Everyone has felt excluded at some point. Why would you want to force that upon somebody else? And that is actively what is in fact happening. Liz, other comments or questions?
Yes, do have another really good question that kind of speaks to what you were talking about, since we're in an inclusion conversation today. Wondering how you feel, Lesléa, right, about how your identity intersections have informed and inspired your creative process. What a great question. We could do a whole half hour just on that question.
Right.
And sexual orientation.
So, like everybody else, I have multiple identities. I like to think of myself as a multi-dimensional person. So I identify as a lesbian, I'm Jewish, I'm cisgender. Now I've entered yet a new category. I'm a woman of a certain age. So that's very interesting, to be in a new category that I've never been in before. So, everything I do, we talked about this. Some of my books, like Gittle's Journey, has no LGBTQ content, and overtly that's true, but it really does, because it came from me. It came from my heart, and it comes from a place of yearning for family, which is what Gittle was yearning for when she immigrated to America. So I feel like everything I do, I bring all of me to. And I think we all do that. So everything that we are influences everything that we do.
And Lesléa, I remember reading, when I first started reading your books, so much of what you were writing about, and it came up frequently, was about the intersection of being a woman who is both Jewish and a lesbian, and how those two things play together. And I remember it was sort of this active, and it was so embedded in your writing, and it popped up so many times that it became very much a part of the story that I was always conscious of, and that changed the lens that I was using. And it was fascinating to think about when you actually actively look at how those intersections change the experience for the reader too.
Well, I have to tell you something funny. Back in the day when we really couldn't be out as much as we can be now, I was a code word. And I heard that Jewish women would say, "Do you know Lesléa Newman?" And that would mean, "Are you a lesbian?" And that was so cool.
You had like the lesbian version of Friend of Dorothy, basically.
Right. Are you
a lesbian? This is like the best thing ever. That's like the trivia that I never knew.
Yeah.
You heard it here, only from P Flag National, folks. You heard it here first. So
we're not out stories now. Do we have anything else? Because I know we're getting a little close on time.
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes left. We just have a thank you from Jean Marie's mom, which I had a
Hi, Mommy.
We're so close to Mother's Day. I had to say that. So I know we're almost out of time. I want to make sure we get to thank everybody and wrap up this conversation well.
Well, thank you, Lesléa. Thank you so much for being with us today, and for spending time with us, and for everything that you've done. You are very much a piece of our history and an active piece of creating where we're going next. And I'm so grateful to you for being here. And I'm so grateful to you for spending some time and just continuing to be you and not backing down.
Well, thank you for having me. We were worried we wouldn't have enough time we wouldn't have enough to talk about it. And of course, the time flew. So I hope to be back again, because we have a lot more to talk about.
Absolutely. I promise you will be back again. We will talk again. Thank you so much for being with us. And I promise you'll come visit again. And I guess, Liz, it's time for me to wrap it up.
It is indeed. I'm just going to give a quick shout out to folks. If you enjoyed this, we're going live on Sunday with PFLAG's virtual Mother's Day brunch. We'll be here at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. We'll actually be on Facebook Live. We'll be on Twitter. We'll be on YouTube. You can also find us at pflag.org/Mother's Day. We'll be spending time with great guests, the family from Circus of Books, with Ali Sheedy and her child, with Belinda Carlisle and her son, Duke Mason. It's a great lineup. I hope you guys will all come back, and hope everyone will come back and join us. Thanks for taking us out, Jean Marie.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Lesléa. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. Thursdays really are the highlight of the week for me, because it's time to actually have a conversation as well as wear real clothes, which also helps. But thank you for being here. Thank you for your 30 minutes. And thanks for having these conversations. Just as a reminder, you can be doing these very same conversations at home, please visit straightforequality.org. And if you just click on discussion series, you will be able to access the articles and the questions that we are using here. Also, if you need support or more information about PFLAG National, please visit pflag.org. And so as we close today, I will wrap up by saying the thing the doctor warns us to do every week, which is to run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, be kind. We will see you next week on Something to Talk About.